Reagan didn't need to say black to declare war on us. He didn't have to. He used words like welfare queen, law and order, and the war on drugs. But who was he really talking about? When Reagan took office in 1981, black communities in America were just starting to see real progress after centuries of legal denial against them. Then he pulled the rug, slashed housing, cut education, dismantled welfare, and called it reform. At the same time, he militarized the police and jump-started the war on drugs. A war that didn't go after the Wall Street coke users, but instead went after the low-hanging fruit, the black Americans and black communities across the United States. The language sounded neutral, but the impact wasn't. This is how the system reinvented itself, and we're still paying for it today. This is Reaganomics 101. I remember being a young child, and I remember there being local programs in our communities, whether it was these various community centers that had, elders and adults who would provide opportunities for us to do any number of things, whether it was sports, whether it was additional educational training or tutoring. And there used to be double Dutch competitions, and the young girls who were good enough, they would travel across the region and across the country in these other competitions against, girls from other cities. And it was very communal. And the same with the drill teams. You had these drill teams, these young boys and these young girls who would travel across the region and across the country for these competitions, not to mention the summer programs where you had teenagers who will work during the summers, high school and college students who will work at camps, for elementary and middle school kids, and they would spend the summers together and they would go on trips and vacations. And then towards the end of my high school years, all of this finally this whole infrastructure just disappeared. So basically, we're talking about what life was like for Black Americans after the Civil Rights Movement. So things like affirmative action, public housing, and welfare were designed to correct centuries of legal mandates against Black progress. So Reagan takes the helm around 1981.
For those who've abandoned hope, we'll restore hope and we'll welcome them into a great national crusade to make America great again.
His administration started to immediately attack much of the gains of the civil rights period. And a lot of it was the ways in which Black communities and Black people were framed.
In Chicago, they found a woman who holds the record. She used 80 names, 30 addresses, 15 telephone numbers to collect food stamps, Social Security, as well as welfare. Her tax-free cash income alone has been running $150,000 a year.
So Black women were deemed welfare queens, and the rhetoric against Black males was this whole discussion around being tough on crime.
9 out of 10 Americans believe that the courts in their home areas aren't tough enough on criminals. And the cold statistics do demonstrate the failure of our criminal justice system to adequately pursue, prosecute, and punish criminals.
The political message mostly catered to a white backlash against some of the racial progress that we started to see as a result of the Civil Rights Acts and laws. He's also responsible for implementing cuts that crushed Black communities across the United States. So you had after-school programs, you had free programs to help, young Black kids stay off the streets. So whether it was, learning how to play instruments, learning different arts and craft programs, learning how to act and sing, you had all of these programs in Black communities across the United States that contributed significantly to the arts and the advancement of Black communities and Black people. And essentially all or much of these programs were slashed as part of Reagan's economic programming. And this happened all across the country. This was a national cut that my friends from different parts of the United States felt the same impact. And of course, this led to, the war on drugs, which essentially became a war on Black America. I saw this with my own eyes. I saw our communities go from having recreational centers in our communities where we could go and we could, we could be busy and productive and use our talents to do certain things. And now when those no longer exist, all we really have now is the local corners and the local areas or the local parks where we could gather, but there's no infrastructure anymore. And so police started to target these communities and these places.
And today, cocaine and marijuana are found throughout our society from top to bottom. And that means corruption top to bottom and gang war violence.
And to think about it this way, we have many, if not all of the drugs, the illicit drugs that so many people were found in possession of are foreign-grown substances. They don't grow anywhere within the United States, and they certainly don't grow in urban communities.
Okay, right there you have a sign that says, "Welcome to Elmdale's Block Club." But this is ridiculous. There's no sense in them even having a sign there. You got too many drug problems right here in this one block.
Now, this lady that just walked out right here, that's standing on the porch. Now, she's a seller and a user.
So how did they land in predominantly Black and urban communities, right? All at the same time. How did all of these drugs find their ways into Black communities at a time when cuts were pervasive, at the same time that you had this mass militarization of police forcing?
Since 1981, federal funding for drug interdiction has tripled to over $1 billion. The government boasts of its victories and shows off the booty, but huge amounts of drugs continue to arrive.
At a time when Black kids don't have any of the programming that they had just 5 or 10 years prior, and a lot of the job opportunities are gone because the deindustrialization is in full bloom, which came with the flooding of our communities with these drugs. And then so you have the discrepancies in sentencing around powder cocaine because mostly white folks, Wall Street kinds of folks, were mostly engaged with powder cocaine, whereas poor communities and Black communities were mostly engaging with crack cocaine, the rock cocaine. So you had this imbalance in sentencing. You had this complete difference in sentencing, even though it's essentially the same product.
Karen Garrison is the mother of twins, Lamont and Lawrence. In 1998, they were arrested in Washington and charged with conspiracy to sell cocaine. Lawrence was sentenced to more than 15 years in prison, Lamont to over 19.
Nobody actually cared if they were innocent or guilty because everybody that knew them knew they were innocent. But then when you talk to people that didn't know them, the first thing they kept saying is, well, why did they give them so much time?
One of the reasons the Garrison twins received such long sentences is because they were charged with selling cocaine in crack form rather than in powder. Federal law mandates a minimum 5-year sentence for intent to sell 5 grams of crack, which weighs the same as 2 pennies. But it takes 500 grams of powder cocaine to trigger the same mandatory minimum.
I remember, for example, there was a police officer who would patrol our neighborhoods, and I'm talking about me as a young teenager. He would pull up in his police cruiser, and he would get on his microphone, and he would say to us, as we're all congregating in our neighborhoods, right, that we all were born and raised on, and he would say, "Okay, monkeys, okay, niggers, time to go home." And just casually, this is what he would say. This same particular cop, he would grab guys off the streets, and if they didn't have drugs on them, he would put them on them. If they didn't have a gun on them, he would put one on them. And then these guys will go away for long periods of time. And everybody that I know, every young Black kid that I know from any of the major urban cities across the United States has an example like this.
Yeah, you run into my car, you can stop and talk to me, man. Yeah, that's right, nigga. I got the handcuffs on, too. Bitch, you raised mother.
In my car, I'd have shot you.
Yeah, I would have shot back, too.
Yeah, would you? You're a killer at heart. Where's your gun?
Yeah, I'm a killer.
All right.
Somebody pushing me, man. What's wrong with you? Hands off me.
And the level of dehumanization, the level of disrespect for us from in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And this is really what policing was like.
And last night, I tell you, to watch that thing on television as I did,
Yeah.
to see those monkeys from those African countries, damn them, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes.
Well, and then the tail wags the dog there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The tail wags the dog.
This is what that era, that Reagan era, ushered in for my generation and the generations after. And we see like today, if you look up statistics around, who are the people that are exonerated, whose cases are being thrown out, it's overwhelmingly black men, black people who you're seeing that they're found out through DNA evidence that they didn't commit the crime. It's not because the system is just like correcting itself or, being just or deciding to be just. It's just that you have cadres of lawyers. You have lawyers who are investing in trying to figure out, if you're lucky, who is in jail wrongfully. And then we're starting to see through the grace of good lawyers and good legal work, you're starting to see so many people having their sentences overturned. And then, when you have the example of the term the welfare queen, which was a myth. But, there were a lot of people in our communities who were on welfare. But you have to take this into context. You have to take the welfare system into context. Remember, this is on the heels of the civil rights legislation. And a big part of the civil rights legislation was the acknowledgement that Black people have for centuries been legally disenfranchised. They were legally disenfranchised. And so the welfare system was an attempt to correct that error, to correct that wrong. And so 10, 15 years after Black folks are using the welfare system, what happens is the welfare system is essentially contributing to the breakup of Black families.
So she said, well, we doesn't lie the 80-some mothers with boyfriend. And I couldn't understand that. So she left. When she left, well, then she come back to tell me that my case was denied. This is what happened. She come back to tell me that they had denied me, that I could not get on the aid.
Weeping and crying for someone to love.
In Cleveland and elsewhere, very little economic incentive exists for women to get off welfare.
They would like for you to go out and go to work, or even seek part-time employment. But if you do this, then most of what you make is taken away from you.
And so this, in order to benefit from the welfare system, which is also coincides with deindustrialization, when all the manufacturing jobs are essentially being shipped offshored to places like China. We're talking about an entire industry that was shift off overseas. And this caused a lot of turmoil within Black families. These are all products of the Reagan-era economics. And we have to remember, this didn't happen in a vacuum. This is part of a connection. This is connected to the civil rights movement. This is connected to the people who fought for civil rights. And these were some of the remedies as a result of it. So Reagan was very intentional about unraveling and undoing so many of the civil rights era legislation and policies. And we're still suffering from these rollbacks. And even current presidents and every president since Reagan has been involved in rolling back civil rights.
And we will make America great again.
Ronald Reagan for president. Let's make America great again.
So today, if we look at rollbacks in the immigration policy, rolling back the Department of Ed, these are all civil rights era, industries or infrastructure that are being rolled back and attacked. But again, in order to understand these policies, we need to understand the history behind them. And the history behind them were fundamentally acknowledging a long history, hundreds of years of legal discrimination against black communities. This was the genesis for all of these policies that we're now starting to see roll back.
Word up, quick to set it, don't wet it. Real niggas lick shots, peace, Connecticut. Now yo,
what up, yo? Time is running out, it's for real though. Let's connect, politics, ditto. We can trade places, getting left in this cases. Word up.